My biggest recommendation, and again, like I come from the vendor side, but I'm very, very committed to provide information to my clients, and we work with publishers. So we get questionnaires from publishers all the time. My biggest wish for questionnaires would be that they not be quite as standardized across AdTech publishers. And I realize that that's a lift on the publisher side. However, we very often get questions that are not really relevant to us, but asked in a way that we, often it's only a yes or no response and we can't really provide any context. It just makes the process of providing information harder than it needs to be. So my recommendations are usually to try and develop some degree of conditional logic in your questionnaires, or at least some differentiation based on how or the kind of spend category, the kind of product or service that you're trying to buy. That's how we do our own due diligence with vendors. We have a mature onboarding process, and one of the first questions that we ask in that process is, what are you selling? Because if you're selling non-technology consulting services, you may very well get access to personal data, and we may very well need to vet how you do that. But the questions that I'm going to need to ask you as a consultant are not the same that I would ask a SaaS provider. So having a little bit of clarity in that process and distinguishing and being able to sort of carve out sections of questionnaires that are really not relevant to you. For example, if you do not engage in profiling at all, spending a substantive amount of time answering not applicable, not applicable, not applicable, two questions that are not relevant to you may not really be effective use of anyone's time. But also often those questions come with only a yes or no answer. So I've dealt with questions that essentially say, when you collect personal data, do you for profiling purposes, do you get consent? Yes or no? And I don't have a good way to answer that question because I don't collect data for profiling purposes. But if I say no, it seems like what I'm saying is that I don't get consent, which is not what I'm trying to say. So I think going into the details in those questions and making the questions relevant, or at least categorize them by buckets. We offered, 5 potential buckets of AdTech already, would make the documentation that you have on your end a lot more higher quality, and it will be more relevant. I think just a lot of the time listening to what the vendor is trying to say is really important. And I know it probably comes, you're probably questioning it because I'm one of the vendors, but it happens to me with my own vendors. All of us in the world are buyers and sellers. We're not just one or the other. And I see it with my own vendors. Oftentimes just having asking the right question will quell a lot of concern, while the wrong question might raise concerns or trigger anxieties that are not even entirely relevant.